The case I want to talk to you about today is the October 1997 murder of 13-year-old Marianne Measles. Marianne Measles was from a small town of New Milford in Connecticut, and she had a whole life ahead of her. She lived with her mum and her 3 sisters, who she shared an incredible bond with. Her mum was like her best friend, and she was protective over all of her sisters. She had a lust for life, and she wanted to live. And had she been allowed to live, she would have gone on to live a full and happy life. She was a real bright spark in all of her family and friends' lives. Now, Marianne Measles was murdered at just age 13 by 8 people that at one time she had called friends. Marianne Measles was a great girl. Due to some friendships that she shared in the neighbourhood, she'd come into contact with an older group of children who she'd began to hang out with. Her mum at the time wasn't aware just how old they were. She assumed they were a little bit older than Marianne, but they were hanging around at a youth centre. There didn't seem to be any problems. Marianne seemed relatively happy, until one day she came home crying. She shared with her mum that she had had sexual experiences with 2 of the men in this group, which her mum realised straight away was statutory R word, and took Marianne to the local police station to report it. Now, Marianne's sister Jennifer says that she believes that Marianne had some kind of undiagnosed ADHD, and she would have found it really hard and tough to sit there for a great period of time, recalling things that were traumatic to her. So after about half the statement had been done, Marianne's mum took her home for the evening, and they were going to come back at a later date to finish making that report. Now, Marianne's mum was a single mum, Cynthia. She was a single mum of 4 beautiful, vivacious girls, and she was trying her absolute best. They had a happy, safe home, and Marianne was so aware of how safe her home was that she wasn't scared of the dark as a child. Their house backed onto woods, and she was not terrified at all. She did not care. She just felt so safe and protected by her mum that she just felt like nothing could hurt her. And we must note here that after Marianne was put in a situation where she was exploited by these older guys, the first person she reached out to and told the truth to was her mum. So she really had that relationship with her mum where she could just be open and honest. A couple of days after Marianne had gone to the police station to initially make this report, she had spent time with one of her friends, at which stage she'd reached out to her mum at a phone box and kind of called her mum and said, please come and get me. Her mum could hear a group of teenagers or older people in the background screaming and calling Marianne horrific names. So she went to pick her up. Now, just after her mother had picked her up, they were at the New Milford shopping centre. Cynthia went in to just pick up a couple of items, and during that time when she was in the shop, Marianne went missing from the car. Now, Marianne's family knew straight away that something had happened, and they tried to tell the police over and over again that due to the claims that she had made to the police recently, and the fact that her mum had heard these people shouting and screaming horrific abuse at her when she called her mother, that there was something there and somebody had brought Marianne to harm. But the police were just kind of really sure that it was a runaway situation. They didn't do enough to find her. And it was left to Marianne's family to kind of put up missing people's flyers, look for her, search for her, question her friends. There was really little help. Now, on July the 15th, 1998, 9 months after Marianne went missing, a decomposed body was found wrapped in a blanket and tied with chains in the Linanoa boat launch in Bridgewater. Dental records identified that body as belonging to Marianne Measles. Now, trigger warning here, because we must talk a little bit about what happened to Marianne on the day that she went missing, which led to her remains being discovered in that lake later on. Now, the 2 men who were accused of the statutory R word, along with 6 other people, had kidnapped Marianne, taking her to a local spot that kids used to hang around in that was dark and away from the houses. They had gang R-worded her, beating her up in a gang, and then after several hours of holding her head underwater, pulling her back out, there was a beating involved. Eventually she was drowned in that lake. Now, here are the suspects who have all been convicted since for the murder of Marianne Measles. I want you to take a second to just picture this. All of these people, 3 women, 5 men, all aged between 17 and 24, took on one 13-year-old little girl. They destroyed Marianne and took her life for little to no reason. Take a second to look just how many of them there are, their ages, how they look, who they are, and just think of how terrified Marianne would have been in her final hours. This here is Lake Lillinoa, which is where Marianne Measles was recovered just 9 months after she went missing. Now, it took 5 years after Marianne went missing for police to arrest and charge 7 people at that time with the murder. That's 5 years of her mum and her sisters and the rest of the family members, as well as friends and the local community, waiting to hear just what had happened and who was responsible for the death of Marianne. Now, the people involved and who were convicted for the murder of Marianne actually just were sentenced from anywhere from 30 years to life in prison. Now, one of them, Maggie May Bennett, has already been released. She only served 17 years. So she was 40 years of age when she was released. She can still have a normal life. She can still go on to have a family, children, a dream job, whatever she wants to do, despite the fact that she took away the life of an innocent girl at the age of 13. It just doesn't sit right with me. Now, what happened to Marianne was just so senseless. She was such a loving and loved member of her family. She was spunky, she was funny, she was protective. She had random food cravings that she loved to eat, that the rest of her family were like, how can you eat that? She was just like a real personality, and she would have gone on to do such great things. And it's so, so sad that not only did she lose her life at the age of 13, but in such an horrific way. And it seems so unfair that her family are now bit by bit watching these killers get released from prison when they've served just a little bit more than the age that Marianne was when they took her life. Rest in peace, Marianne. May you fly high.